I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the primary parents, often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about the rules. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who have stepped up to be lead dads and other dads who want to learn from them. Today, my guest is Jay Lauf. He is the co-founder and president of Charter, a news site going deep on the future of work. He had a great career in magazines and media. He was the chairman and publisher of Quartz, the publisher of The Atlantic, and the publisher of Wired. He was also a 20-year veteran of Metro North, the commuter train that took him from Fairfield, Connecticut to New York City, where he worked. It was a 2+ hour commute one way. It got to a point where he preferred flying far away to sitting on that train to go into the office. So many lost hours spent commuting. COVID changed all that. And at home with his wife and 2 daughters, he found the joys of being a lead dad, getting so much time back after years of commuting. And that experience changed his view on work and parenting. Jay, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thank you, Paul. Excited to be here. Glad to be here.
Let's talk commute. You know, a guy who did it so long. Did you have a seat that was yours? Did you get on every day and like that was your seat right there?
Oh yeah. When I first started out, I tend to be a cynic at times, and when I first started out, I'd get on the platform and you see these guys like with the men and women actually with the wide stance and the elbows out, like at their spot, knowing exactly where the doors would open and would rush onto the seats. And I'd roll my eyes and think, man, these people are wildly intense. And after about a month, I was making sure I was there 5 minutes ahead of them so I could deploy my wide stance and get my seat. So yes, I 100% was that person.
My wife tells this story. My wife for years commuted into the city before she moved her firm out to Connecticut. And one day she just sat down in a seat and the guy came up to her and said, that's my seat. And she looked around, the train where we live in New Canaan, the train stops here. So you have tons of seats. You looked around, there like 20 empty seats. She's like, are you serious? Like, yeah, that's my seat. I said, well, not today, sir. I didn't even know what to say.
That was not me, by the way, just for your listeners. That I would not have done that. But I definitely learned that if you weren't careful, you would end up wedged in that center seat or some other thing. You also want the front, the lead car on the way in for sure, just a faster exit out of the tunnel at Grand Central than the third or fourth or fifth car.
Oh, 100%. You're a trained pro. 20 years of this, when you look back on it, any fond memories or memories? Was there anything about the train that helped you be more efficient or to organize your life in some way?
Yeah, well, it was interesting when I stopped doing the commute. I had wondered this for a long time and did find it at first, but have since shed it, which was the kind of the unwinding time or just the transition time, particularly on the ride home. From just the intensity, go of, work and meetings, every minute of the day to, walking in the door, having that hour and a half to sort of decompress a little bit, clean up the inbox and so on, I think was useful. The longer I commuted, the less useful that was. But to sort of elaborate on that, it was 20 years. So when I first started commuting, it was really pre Wi-Fi internet ubiquity. And so on the way in the morning, this persisted all the way through 20 years. I really loved the opportunity to sort of wake up, read the news, set up your day, think about what the meetings were, just sort of prep yourself for the day on the train ride in. That never changed. It was a paper process, in the first few years and became more of a digital process on the way back. What I found is that dynamic really shifted things on the return trip, because on the return trip in those first few years, again, without the access to the internet, you'd read a book or, you would do something that was more in the vein of pleasure reading. What I found is the minute you had a device in your hands that connected to your email or chat or whatever it was, you're in a panic the entire ride back, just attending to that, answering back and forth conversations. The train could have gone all the way to Montreal and I wouldn't have even noticed, for the last probably 7, 8, 10 years of that trip.
Yep. And I think about that because, And on the one hand, it could have been so efficient, but it's not like you had to work, you worked a shorter day in the office. It's not like you could tack on those, 4 hours of your commute and say, look, I only need to be in the office for five hours. That just made your day longer, correct? Your work day longer.
Absolutely, which is a thing we can talk about because I think that's a big perception shift that has changed for me. But right, exactly. I would always try to, as the entire time I was doing that commute, I was the leader of something. And so I'd always want to sort of set the tone, be the first person in the office. One, just again, to set myself up a little bit, but also just to make sure people knew, there were expectations here. So I would try to get into my seat by 8 a.m. most mornings. So that means obviously leaving on a 6-ish train to do that. And right, exactly. Then between the meeting schedules, the desire for your team to have FaceTime, et cetera, you're finding that you're leaving the office at 6, getting on a 6:30 train home, and home by 8:30 makes for and working that entire time
Yeah.
makes for a really long day. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking a 14 and a half hour day. And I know, the future work is something that Charter is really leaning in on. When you look at that now, like how abruptly, COVID has shifted our perceptions around work and an office. I know you guys don't even have offices. You're all sort of spread out around the country. When you look back, how quickly, decades and decades. This goes back to the 1950s, 1940s. The commute, when this part of Connecticut was built out, people just did it. They didn't think they had a choice. Sort of 70 plus years of doing this. Did you ever imagine that it could change? So abruptly and so totally that the commute would be questioned, or that the efficiency of the commute would come into question?
Yeah, I mean, the efficiency of the commute was in question for a long time. And yeah, I think a lot of these questions were sort of bubbling under the surface for a long time. So I think subconsciously, yeah, I did suspect that there was a way to reveal what's been revealed. It really took the pandemic, to your point, I think, to we talk a lot about, we steal a phrase from Linda Gratton, who is an expert on this stuff, that, everything unfroze. Our way of doing things was frozen pre-pandemic, and the pandemic thawed everything out. And part of what, I'm working on right now with Charter is to ensure that before things refreeze, we shuffle the deck, that we change things around so we don't just refreeze back to what we were doing before. But sure, yeah, for a lot of years, it's interesting. I just put a LinkedIn post on this. I used to say to myself, I am going to at least every other week, maybe once a month, take a Friday and work from the library up here in Connecticut to get heads down work done, to avoid all the interruptions that happen during the day, and to preserve myself on a Friday for the commute. And I always felt guilty when I did do that, because for all the reasons you might imagine, you're not in the office, you're missing FaceTime, all your colleagues are there. But I sat next to Beth Comstock, who used to be the chief marketing officer at GE during the Jeff Immelt kind of heyday. She's just really one of the all-star CMOs of all time, and just business people of all time. And I sat next to her at an event, maybe back in 2010 or something, and she told me she did the same thing. So I live in Fairfield, Connecticut. GE was based up here, and she said, "Yeah, no, She went to the same library I did." Which felt very validating to me at that time. As a woman who's like sitting on the board of Nike and other things, and who was doing the same thing. But the truth is, I never actually did it. So I said to myself, I'm going to do this, once every other week, once a month. And, I probably 3 times a year did it. So I knew it was there. I knew, and when I did do it, all the benefits were there. I would
Yeah.
knock out so much important work. I would do incredible thinking. And guess what? Oh, wow. I was home for dinner with the family. And felt, and would come in, recharged on Monday versus resentful on Monday. But yeah, I could never bake it in. And now that the pandemic, thawed out that thinking, I would never go back to not doing that.
I mean, why do you think that was? Because as you said, Jay, I mean, you were a leader of things, during that commute. You weren't, the middle manager. You weren't the person right out of college taking the job. You were setting the tone. So if you did it, it would have been okay. Nobody's telling
Right.
you, you can't do it. What do you think it was, when you sort of analyze it and look back, that kept you from doing something that the few times you did it, you realized it was more efficient for your work, and it gave you more time to be with your wife and in your 2 daughters?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question that I should probably spend more time on, because, part of it is probably my own neurosis around, the what I would have thought was the value of of just being there, of the physically being there, to be present, to answer ad hoc questions that pop up, or to participate in serendipitous brainstorms, or again just to, I think, just I also had an old school way of thinking that was, if you weren't there, who knows what you're doing, and probably a lack of trust to a degree across not everybody on the team, obviously, probably not even the majority of the team, but a handful of people who, if they decided, okay, on Fridays, I'll do that too, that are they really going to get stuff done? Which is really, hypocritical and silly of me, because we can also talk about, I had long experimented with people who worked remotely for me, and were among the highest performers. One example I'll give you, and then I think it's worth talking about others, is there was a woman on my team at Wired back in the aughts who was one of our top sellers out of the LA office, working on accounts in LA. And her husband did a residency, was a heart surgeon, and he did a residency in New York. So she called me up to say, listen, I don't know if you have a spot for me in New York, but I may need to resign or look for another position within Condé Nast. And she was so good, and luckily the way that the team was constructed, I was able to find a spot for her in New York. So she does 2 years in New York while her husband's doing the residency, kicks ass there, is one of our best salespeople in New York, and then comes into my office and says, I think this is really it. I'm really going to have to resign. My husband just got a partnership in a heart surgery group in Las Vegas, which is not exactly a hub for ad agencies or advertising, right? So she said, I'm sorry to go, but I think I'm going to have to go because we were just going to make this move. And I said, well, hang on a second. Can you handle the Southwest territory from Las Vegas? And she said, yeah. So I fired our rep firm, and she covered, part of Southern California, Texas, I'll forget the other, Colorado and the other major markets. And guess what? In about 8 months, tripled the revenue that we got from those areas. And she joined me over at the Atlantic in the same setup, in the same situation. One of the Atlantic magazine's best sales reps was based in Las Vegas, which is counterintuitive. But that showed me way back when, very early on, that it didn't matter. If you have a high quality person working from anywhere, they're going to get the job done. And it didn't matter that she was in an office in LA or New York or anywhere, Chicago, it didn't matter.
I think the interesting part here, though, and this is something that at the company dads we're really focused on, is that if you have a senior executive, let's just say a senior female executive in this case here, wants to have a family, you have to, if she doesn't have a lead dad who has some level of flexibility, who doesn't have an employer who understands it, you're going to lose that person. And you talked about being fearful of working from the library because you had a few employees who are not going to do their job. That's the case everywhere. I think now in 2022, something I'm very passionate about is really focusing on those high performers. Like a woman like you just spoke of, she would have just left and you would have lost somebody who was so amazing. So even before COVID, you had the sense as a publisher, like, okay, I need to accommodate her. And now there are a bunch of guys here who cannot be left to their own devices. They need to be at the desk. Right. They need to be but your lowest performing employees are never going to leave because nobody wants to hire them. They have no place to go. It's these high performers. And I just wonder what you think about, in this moment, as people are coming back to offices or not going back to offices or being ordered into offices, if you're an employee at Uber, what is it going to mean, for those high performers? And why do you think some leaders of companies still have that perception that people, need to be in an office to do their job?
Yeah, well, I think, again, when you're in leadership, you're assailed with all kinds of inputs and and fears and concerns, and some of that is never going to go away, exactly, around performance. But I think one of the things we write a lot about at Charter, and that's really shifted my thinking, is I think it's really important to do a couple of things. One is measure outcomes, not hours. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you need to make the implicit explicit. So you need to be really clear with everybody in every kind of a role what the expectation is for the job, and managers need to be explicit about what they will measure and what they expect and what the norms are. And if you do that, it alleviates the need to think about whether somebody is, within your line of sight or, tethered to their desk or not.
Right.
And I think actually has a chance, to your point, to have us focus more on high performers, and and even in some ways be able to to measure lower performers more objectively than we might have in a situation where ambiently they're in your line of sight, and you're like, okay, good, that person's working away, they must be doing something. That dumbs it all down in terms of, I think, my own thinking and approach there. It was obviously a lot more nuanced than that ever was. And then I think there's a whole host of leaders who just, themselves love being in the office and in the thick of it every single minute. And it's just the way they are and the way they operate. But they need to, I think you need to realize that especially at larger companies, you've got thousands of employees with 1,000 different, home, situations or life situations that may not either be able to, do what you do in terms of time in the office, and may not thrive in that situation either in the same way that you do. Mm-hmm. So, we can talk more about that if you'd like.
But I mean, do you think employers have any real rational reason to force the majority of their workers back into an office? I mean, obviously, if you're in hospitality, you need to be there. If you're a restaurant worker, you need to be there. But my daughter's best friend, both of her parents are doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I mean, they're literally saving people from cancer, and both of them work at least one day a week from home because they, you're not always saving people from cancer. Sometimes you're doing, paperwork, and I just wonder right. if we've had these 2 years where people have either proven that they can do this because they're highly motivated and they know how to do their job wherever, or they've struggled, and that's a different issue. But, because we had this pause, or as you call it, this unfreezing, I mean, is there any real justification for, some of the firms that have really, drawn a line in the sand and said, you have to come back in?
Well, I think that's hard to answer because, roles are different. The companies and what they're doing are different. So, a doctor has a very different need and rhythm of work from a marketing person, for example. But I think a better way to think about it is that what the research seems to be showing, and a lot of the best thinkers on this will tell you, is that there are definitely advantages to co-location that can't and should not be ignored. But hybrid is probably the way to go. So, I know this is an overused term. We're talking about remote work, hybrid. But the one thing I'm kind of sort of settling in on is that I don't think, come and go as you please is exactly the right way to do it. Right. All remote is probably not ideal, except for in the situation like I just described. Somebody moved to Albuquerque who's like a really high performer and is not going to be able to come into your office in Chicago. That, all right, you live with that. But I think for teams that are in and around an office hub, the idea is to be really, again, intentional and prescriptive about which days you will be in the office and why you're going to be there. Mm-hmm. And so shifting your thinking from the office being a place where work is done to it's a tool for how work gets done. And so Tuesday through Thursday are the days that you're going to have, live in-person brainstorms and, team building sessions and one-on-ones, that need to be done together, all team stand-ups, that kind of thing. And then on these other days, we were all going to work remotely. And I think if you set those parameters, you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to get, the benefits of co-location because everybody's in the office and they know why they're there and they're excited to be there. And then on these other days where you can offer flexibility, the people who want the flexibility for everything from caregiving to actually getting heads down work, like I was describing, I was able to do in the library, they can do that. That's where I think this all starts to land at some point.
Yeah. Since, this is great. Let's kind of pivot a bit and talk a bit about children, about your children and about, the children of people who work for you during that 20-year commute. I was doing a podcast the other day, and for the first time, and I've probably done a couple dozen of these at this point, for the first time, one of my daughters walked in the door behind me. And I don't know how that hasn't happened. But we all remember this famous moment where this guy was on the BBC. His son comes in and his wife dives on the kid and like reels
I think
him
it was
in,
the
like,
nanny, maybe.
maybe I don't know who it was, but they say like pulls the kid out, like,
Yeah.
like you're watching Greatest Catch or something like that. That they got this 600-pound tuna, and the kid goes out, and the thing goes viral. That happens all the time now, and
Yeah.
this is the power of hindsight. But when you look back at the different leadership roles, how did you how did you manage people who had needs around caregiving around their own children, whether they were a mom and a high performer, or a dad and a high performer, a dad who needed to help out? How did you handle some of those situations then, and when you look back, how might you have handled them differently?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have to say I'm pretty proud of my track record there. I was always, I think, an empathic, parent myself who, I was never one of these fathers who's like, oh, thank God I'm going to get on the train or get out of the house here. Like, these kids are driving me crazy. I craved time with these kids, with my kids, and missed them terribly when I was doing those 14-hour days. But yeah, there's probably a better way to do this in the sense of, not limiting it just to parental caregiving necessarily, but really anytime, even in my most obnoxious days of, getting in the office early and leaving late and making sure people knew, that there was FaceTime. If somebody had a caregiving need, I just, the answer was clear. Go do it. Like, that's your priority. Do it. You've got an ailing father and you need to take care of them for a few days, take the time off. I would, if the company didn't offer the amount of time off, I would let them do it and not tell, the bean counters that this person took extra time off. If you had a child's concert or you needed to do something, just go do it. Like that to me was just a no-brainer. Just, I think, as a human being, those to me were always priorities, both for me and I'm sure for these folks. I tell a story where when I got and I'm going to leave out the brand I was at and the person I was reporting to for probably obvious reasons, but I got a new job as a leader in the, on the sales and marketing side. And I pulled together this incredible dinner of CMOs that was tied to their annual gathering, an annual CMO gathering in New York for a dinner. We got one of our all-star journalists to headline this dinner. And so there were like 30, 40, 50 CMOs at this dinner that was hosted by my company. And it happened to end up coinciding with the night that my daughter had a concert. And so I said to my boss at the time, who was the president of the company, I was a publisher, I'm not going to be able to make it to this dinner. And he said, what are you talking about? Like, you put it together, first of all, and like all your top clients are going to be there. And I said, yeah, no, I know, but my daughter has this concert and I just don't miss those. And so fast forward, he attended, he was going to attend anyway. I had a couple of my senior salespeople there attend, and I didn't. And so at the start of the dinner, the president of the company got up to say, welcome everybody and say, I know Jay did the invite, but he can't be here tonight because his daughter has a concert. And apparently he told me afterward, I got a standing ovation from the CMOs in the room.
For you not being there, for you picking your daughter's concert.
For me deciding to go to that, not to be there. And that was just such a stark, seminal one for this person to admit it to me, to say that to me versus like still haranguing me that I didn't go to this thing. But to recognize that, and to recognize that these high-powered people also felt the same way, just that really validated a way of life that I had developed all along the way, a way of working that I think made me more empathic leader.
It's interesting. And I love that story. Dana Susskind, who's a surgeon at the University of Chicago, just came out with a book called Parent Nation. And her first husband, who died young, unfortunately, was a famous surgeon, like the surgeon of all surgeons, teaching people. And he had something in his calendar that would say, private meeting with so and so, head of the department, and it seemed, this is really important. Like, don't mess with this. And one of his residents one day saw him on the baseball field watching his son play ball. And the resident, pretty crazy, courageous guy, went up to him and said, Dr. So-and-so, is this the high level meeting that you're having with, so-and-so in epidemiology? And the guy, this famous surgeon kind of looks at him shocked. And he says, yeah, but don't tell anyone. Don't worry, it'll be our secret. And you see, like, and that was, in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. You see it sort of, iteratively, we're getting better. Like, that guy had to fake it.
Yeah.
You could at least say, my daughter has a concert. In my dreams, if you have really good workers, I would love somebody to say, you know what, I need to take the next hour and just go take a walk with my daughter. She had a hard
Yeah.
day at school. We're just gonna take a walk and maybe get her some ice cream. But I'll log back on an hour, hour and a half, and don't worry, I don't have anything planned tonight. I'll finish everything up at 10. Do you think we're at that moment where the worker parent can be that level of honest, or should we just be happy that we can say, hey, I got to go to a baseball game, and you get a free pass for that?
Yeah. No, I hope so. I think we're getting closer and closer to that. And I think the reason is if you look at the data around, there's a lot of talk about the great resignation. The numbers are true. I think it's something like, 4 million people have a month for, the last since February or something have left their jobs. And the number of people who are considering leaving their jobs remains incredibly historically very high. And if you look at the number 1 and 2 reasons, which are neck and neck for doing that, one is pay, no surprise, but the other is flexibility.
Yeah.
With flexibility often leading, people want flexibility for the very reason that you're saying. And part of that flexibility is the ability to work from anywhere, or at least that's the other point, I guess, Paul, about, going back to the office. A lot of people are not resistant to going back to the office per se. It's going back to the office, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever the hours are. It's without having the flexibility to do exactly what you were just talking about. Now, with a commute like mine, sure, the walk is going to be delayed by 2 hours. I mean, I can regale you with stories of, having to rush to take care of my dad, who was, in his 90s and ended up in the emergency room, and take me 3.5 hours to actually get to the emergency room from the minute I got the call. But I think having that flexibility is becoming a more important thing, if not because it is the right thing to do, it's the necessary thing to do, because you're going to lose people. People are going to leave, and they're going to go to greener pastures that allow that flexibility. And so the competition for quality talent who, when their number one expectation is that flexibility, I think is going to remain acute and probably change what the dynamic is here. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great thing, to tell another story from my own life. In with Charter, the current thing that we're doing, and as you said, the teams are all remote. We're all on Slack all day, and you know what people are doing on Slack. You're in a meeting, you're available, whatever it is. I very intentionally, because I could not do this for 20 years, I have dinner with my wife, who luckily still likes me. The loving was a given because we've been together a long time, but it turns out we still like each other. I have dinner with her every night from about 6 to 7:15. We like to eat early, and I could never do that before. And I put on Slack, like, dinner with Dawn, and it means don't try to ping me between 6 and 7:30, because I'll be doing dinner and doing the dishes and playing some music and engaging with my wife. And then, yeah, sure, I go back to the office a lot of nights because there's a lot to do in a startup.
Right.
But I'm really clear about what that hour and a half is, and the fact that I'm going to take it. I don't care what everybody else is doing at that point.
But unlike, with you, when you were a publisher of various magazines, and you would go to the library, which you didn't go to, here you're really setting the right tone, because you're being very open about it. Like, oh, okay,
That's right.
If Jay has taken this, hour and a half to have dinner and to talk, but you're not eating for an hour. You're talking with your wife. You're spending time with her. You're discussing your days, or you're talking about your children, or where you want to, all kinds of things that are essential to being a human. I think, in you putting it down like that, I think what you're really doing is giving your employees, license to do the same. I'm like, oh, okay,
Precisely.
well, Jay can do it. I can do it. He's not going to yell at me. He did it. This is how we're wired.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I think what we do really well that companies need to adopt as well is, like, have clear stretches of the day that are designed for meetings. So that you've got chunks of hours where people can be flexible. So we're experimenting with, successfully thus far, no meeting Fridays. So we don't have any internal meetings on Fridays. It frees people up for all these things that we're talking about. We haven't said, like, meetings are from 10 to 4, on the other days of the week, but it's pretty clear when the standing meetings are, and so that people can build the kind of flexibility in. And you're right, I'm trying to model it with that dinner Slack.
So let's talk about your own COVID experience, Quartz sells in 2018, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And then you stay on for a couple of years in different roles, but ultimately in 2020, during COVID, you leave. You leave, and you're going to explore other opportunities. But you're leaving when you're at home. There's no more commute. Nobody's commuting. Those trains, those parking lots that used to have millions of dollars of fancy cars in them are empty. And what was that adjustment like for you? Because as you said, your wife is there, but your daughters are there because I think one was in college, one was living in New York, but nobody wanted to be there. You want to come home and have a little bit of space. You don't want to be in that 500 square foot New York City apartment. So what was that moment like for you as the world paused or unfroze, as you say, and you were kind of thinking, this is kind of nice not to do this commute anymore?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say, and I don't say this performatively, and I don't say this lightly, what really came clear to me in that moment was the level of, was just a sense of gratefulness and just, what privilege really is. I quit before COVID. So December 31st, 2019 was my last day at Quartz, with the very intentional plan to take a year's sabbatical in 2020. So I had all kinds of glamorous travel plans that, as you can imagine, blew up. I did get a trip to the Caymans in February, or January, and then so I was just getting into the rhythm of not working for the first time since I was 15, basically, and trying to reboot old habits and get 8 hours of sleep and stuff, and then boom, all of a sudden, I find myself with my 2 adult daughters home, and I'm sheepish about saying this because so many people have had a horrific time during the pandemic. For me, the fact that it coincided with an intention to free up my time and my mental and emotional space to explore other things, and that my 2 daughters walked right into that space. I mean, it couldn't have been more, fortuitous for me. So I went from never being home for dinner, Monday through Friday, to not only being home, but like cooking dinner together, eating it together, and, playing cards afterwards or whatever for 6 months. And it was incredible. It was magic. Whole host of things like that just seemed to really work out well for me. So it's, I just, to this day, I'm grateful for, all of that.
What was it like for them? What was it like for everyone to be, it can either go one or two ways. In your way, fortunately, went the positive way, where you all ended up, still liking each other. But what was it like to have that moment that nobody would have expected that you would have, that you'd have, your adult children home and be together in a way that, you might have had, some summer vacation or something like that when they were 10 and 8 or something? What was, just delve into that feeling? How did it feel to, as you said, recapture some of that time?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt, it felt just magic in so many ways. That I'd wake up in the morning and come downstairs, just like, in my heart would fill up, because this office that I'm sitting in now, that you see me, they don't, you can hear me in this office. My oldest daughter, who has a great job in public radio, took this over and was in it. She was in it before me. Like, I'd come downstairs and she's already in here working, and we'd both laugh about it. And, she would razz me about, taking over the family, the family business, and, all of that. So it was just, that's where I found out my wife and I still like each other, because, we didn't see each other a lot during those 20 years in a lot of ways, because we're taking care of the kids. I'm taking care of an aging parent. So, I got to reconnect with my wife as well. My wife and I would go on a hike at minimum once a week, sometimes twice a week, to little corners of Connecticut that we'd never been in ever, didn't even know existed. We'd go for 3-4 hour hikes, and then like an afternoon dinner. So we connected a lot. And then my youngest daughter, who was in college, who I felt pretty sorry for, because she had her college year sort of blown up, also is among the funniest people I know. And so, she had me in stitches all the time. We were doing things together that were just so much fun. She would do cocktails on Wednesday nights. She's not even a drinker. She doesn't know how to make a cocktail. She just makes stuff up on Wednesday nights. We got stick and poke tattoos together. I've never had a tattoo in my 50 plus years. And my daughter said, let's get tattoos, Dad, one day, because we're all bored, at home. And so I have a tattoo on my arm that is self-inflicted. I put that on myself.
What is it? Describe what it is.
It's a Roman numeral
3,
3 representing my 3 girls, my daughters and my wife.
Okay.
I never got a tattoo for tons of reasons. Among them, you never know what you want to have permanently put on your body. Well, I didn't care about that. It's more like actually doing it yourself is really painful. I bet an artist would have done this lickety split without any pain. But in any case, I mean, we got to be creative, I guess is the way to say all of that. It opened up a whole creative aspect of my relationship with these 3 people who mean more to me than anything in the world, that was squeezed out of the other life rhythm.
Mm-hmm. And then if I have the timeline correct, after really kind of reconnecting and getting this experience, the opportunity came to sort of rejoin Kevin Delaney, a great journalist who was at Quartz, to sort of rejoin him in Charter, and really delve into the future of work. I mean, it's a softball question, but I mean, if that's not serendipity, I don't know what serendipity is. I mean, you were sort of primed to look at work differently because your working life had changed so dramatically. And here's this guy who has this idea, and you're getting the band back together, except you're not getting the band back together in an office, correct? Like your 10 employees are all everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's right. We've got 10 of us at Charter right now, and we have 1 in LA, 1 in San Francisco, 1 in Ohio, 1 in New Jersey, 1 in Washington, DC, 1 in Brooklyn, 1 in Manhattan, 2 in Connecticut. So we're kind of all over the place. I think I was really primed for this, both the topic terrain and the chance to actually do something on our own, and not, be working for another company, at least at this stage. I've always wanted to kind of scratch that itch and take a swing at my own thing. Quartz was pretty close to it because David Bradley and Atlantic Media funded the idea, but then let us run it, with an incredible degree of autonomy, that I also very much recognized at the time. But yeah, so when Kevin, I joined Kevin's company as an advisor, and the more we talked about it, the more interesting it kind of became as something I could really throw myself into full time. And it should be said, we have a third co-founder, Erin Grau, this incredible woman who was a VP of transformation at the New York Times for a stretch of time, and then was VP of people operations at Way, the luggage company. And so we're kind of an interesting mix. I bring the business side experience from publishing. Kevin, as you said, is an editor and a writer and a thinker. And then Erin is kind of this really great operational, the person who's like been in the seat of our target audience in HR, great at operations, and actually a really incredible thinker in this space in her own right. So I feel really lucky to be once again at the front row seat of cutting edge thinking on a thing, which I had that at Wired, I had that at The Atlantic, I had that at Quartz, and I've got it again here.
I gotta ask, like, what's your, parental leave policy like? What's your vacation policy like? Are you walking the walk, or do you limit people to 2 weeks and that's it? And you got to make up a lie if they want to go do something with their kids.
Yeah. No, there's no lying. Total transparency. Kevin, as we speak, Kevin is driving to Oberlin College to pick up his daughter from her freshman year, I think it is. But yeah, no, we've adopted the notion of unlimited vacation time, which, again, all the research will show you is fraught potentially because people tend to take less when they've got a choice. So we also try to be really prescriptive with people about, here's a minimum amount you should be taking. If you're not taking that, let's talk. Like, it means that, either we're not giving you enough time or you haven't carved out enough time to take off. We have mental health days. It's roughly every 6 to 8 weeks or so. We give the whole company a Friday off, just to recharge,
like
and
off,
reboot.
like
No
work. Go take a hike. Go get lunch. Whatever.
Yeah, no work, no meetings. We, again, the leaders model it. We don't show up. We're not slacking you. We're not like, oh, there's just one other thing we got to do. We all take it off. And we're constantly reminding people about attending to their wellness, whether it's through reminding them of resources. Even as a small startup, we've got, mental health resources through our benefits provider that we prioritized and felt was important. And yeah, no, I think we're doing a really good job right now of sort of walking that talk, which is hard to do in a startup where you've got a lean team, but no shortage of things to do. Part of it is, hours and intensity do matter. And so it's about, I think, imbuing these folks with a sense of ownership and excitement about what it is we're doing, and then trusting them to be grownups about exactly, like, if you put in 3 14-hour days back to back, and you need to start at 11 o'clock the next day and maybe cut out at 4, like, go ahead, as long as
Right.
outcomes, not hours,
Right. And I was just going to come back to that. What you said earlier on, like, when you're measuring people on their productivity, on their outcomes, not on how long are they sitting, so-called FaceTime, I think it has to be inspiring. I mean, people are going to, you hire good people, they're going to want to do a good job. And, I think of this one professor I interviewed named Jamie Ladge at Northeastern. And, she's written a lot about fathers, not just, we all know about the sort of penalty that mothers face or have faced historically in the workforce for having kids, lower pay, overtime, the lack of promotions. But men who sort of put their hands up and say, I want to take more parental leave, or I want to do more, with my children. Historically, they've been seen as not sufficiently committed to their job. And that's been a knock against them. And Jamie Ladge, the professor at Northeastern, is very funny and says, well, what do we want? Like, all these consultants who work, 20-hour days and don't see their family. We're having like a company of sociopaths. Like, is that really what we want? And where you guys seem to be, the future work, hopefully, is having a company filled with humans who have lives. And part of that life is working, and part of it is parenting, and part of it is, being with your spouse or taking a hike. And that's okay.
Well, and I think the other part of that is that what you find, and so this has been demonstrable for me, is what you find is that, so burnout is a real thing, right? All the research will say, like, you can do, 55 hours plus in bursts. If you have a project to get out the door, you're launching something, like, you can do that for maybe like 6 to 8 weeks. And after that, it's like every hour over 40 basically is diminishing returns. Like, you just lose and lose and lose and lose productivity. And so if you think about, doing 50 some odd hours a week, 60, 70, like 50 some odd is nothing for a lot of people, right? But it's, so I was doing like 60 some odd as a regular diet. That didn't even include evenings. If you're just doing that as a steady, as your normal state of things, you're going to burn out. And the way that shows up is, uh, insufficient decision-making, but potentially bad judgment, lack of creativity. Eventually you start building up resentment. And the point is, like, you're just going to be a less productive employee if if you're just burning people out.
Yeah.
And so you actually get better results if you give people that room. And I've seen it myself, again, like when I have been able to, have these dinners with my wife, I actually don't resentfully go back into the office. I kind of charge back into the office at 7:30 sometimes when I have a thing that's kind of interesting or important to do. I'm excited to go tackle it because I've recharged, versus in the old days where I would be plowing through that on the train straight through to 8:30, and I'd walk off the train, as a shade of a human being some nights. And, that just, you wake up you're not waking up the next day going, wow, let me go attack it. You're like, wow, I got to get my wide stance on the train platform before somebody else does. It's the only thing you're thinking about.
Today is a day I need my own seat. I need my
right. Yeah, exactly.
Jay Lauf, thank you so much for being my guest on the Company of Dads podcast. I've really enjoyed it. One last question for you.
Yeah.
On the optimism meter. How optimistic are you that what we've unfrozen these past 2 years will become some version of the new world of work from 2022 going forward?
Yeah, wow, that's a really, really good question. On a scale of 10 being the most optimistic, I'm probably at an 8, which is like qualified in some ways. I don't think we're going to get all of the things that we want, or that people think they want in the moment, whatever it is. But I do think we're not going to refreeze to where we were, pre-pandemic. I think there are going to be a lot of new norms that have baked in and become frozen, whatever, to continue the bad, food and temperature analogies. But I think I do have a lot of optimism that this is a real endemic change that's happening. Certainly around the idea of providing people with flexibility. because that's been proven. Like, you can look at productivity statistics. You can look at, again, the departure, the Great Resignation statistics. Everything points to people needing flexibility and being able to cope with and do flexibility successfully. And I think that's a huge step. It may seem like one minor part of it, but if you just think of that, anyone who's listening, you think about that in your own life. If you had the flexibility to come and go as you please a little bit more than you had 4 years ago, that's huge. That's a game changer.
Yeah, good. I'll take that. An 8 on the optimism scale. That's good. Thank you again, Jay. I've really enjoyed our talk today.
Yeah, same here, Paul. And I really appreciate what you all are doing. I think it's both interesting and important work as well.